The moment the boy placed the old compass on the white tablecloth, Arthur Kinsley felt his hands go numb. He recognized the engraving on the back before he even turned it over. The initials were his dead son's. The compass had been buried with him 14 years ago, and yet here it was, warm from a child's pocket, sitting between the breadbasket and a glass of Burgundy in the most expensive steakhouse in Boston. If this story speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're listening from. We'll keep going. Arthur Kinsley had turned 61 that October, though he looked older. Grief will do that to a man. He was the founder of Kinsley Maritime Holdings, a shipping empire that stretched from the eastern seaboard to the ports of Rotterdam, with 42 vessels bearing his name across every major ocean. Forbes had placed him at number 187 on their list that year, and the Boston Globe had run a profile calling him the quiet titan of American shipping. None of it mattered to Arthur. Not really. Not since he saw his son, Benjamin, at 23 years old, killed in a car accident on Route 1 outside Portland, Maine. That was 14 years ago. Arthur had buried his boy in the family plot at Mount Auburn Cemetery, placed that hand-engraved compass in the casket himself, the one he'd given Benjamin on his 18th birthday. It was a Kinsley tradition stretching back 4 generations. Each firstborn son received a compass on his 18th birthday, engraved with his initials and the family motto, "By true north, find your way home." Only 3 had ever been made. Arthur's father had one. Arthur had one, and Benjamin's had gone into the ground with him, or so Arthur had believed. He came to the Capitol Grill on Newbury Street every Tuesday evening. Always alone, always the corner booth. The staff knew him well. They knew to bring his scotch neat, his steak medium rare, and to leave him in peace. Arthur was not an unpleasant man, but there was a heaviness to him, a sadness so deep it had become a kind of gravity that kept others at a respectful distance. His wife, Miriam, had left him 8 years after Benjamin's death, unable to endure the silence that had settled over their marriage like dust on furniture no one uses anymore. She lived in Nantucket now. They spoke on holidays. The evening of November 12th started like any other Tuesday. Arthur was reviewing shipping manifests on his tablet, half eating his Caesar salad, when a commotion at the front made him look up. A boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old, had slipped through the entrance behind a group of businessmen. He was thin in that particular way that spoke of chronic hunger, not just a missed meal but a lifetime of not enough. His jacket was 2 sizes too big, the cuffs hanging past his fingertips. His sneakers had holes in both toes. But the thing Arthur noticed first was the boy's face. There was no shame in his expression, only a quiet, careful watchfulness, like a fox surveying a yard before crossing. The hostess was already moving toward the child, her smile tight with practiced politeness, when Arthur raised his hand. "Let him be," he called out, loud enough that several diners turned. "He can sit with me." The hostess hesitated, glanced at the manager, who nodded quickly. No one argued with Arthur Kinsley. The boy stood at the edge of the booth, suspicious. "I'm not begging," he said. His voice was hoarse but firm. "I just wanted to get warm for a minute." "I can see that," Arthur said. "But since you're here, you might as well eat something. The food is good." The boy slid into the booth slowly, keeping his hands visible on the table, as if to prove he wouldn't steal anything. Arthur ordered him a burger, fries, and a chocolate milkshake, the kind of meal a child should have on any given Tuesday night, but that this boy clearly hadn't had in a long time. "What's your name?" Arthur asked. "Micah," the boy said. "Micah Reeves." "I'm Arthur." Micah nodded but didn't offer to shake hands. He was watching the kitchen door, waiting for the food with an intensity that made Arthur's chest ache. When it came, the boy ate methodically, not desperately. He chewed each bite carefully, as if rationing the experience. Arthur watched him and thought of Benjamin at that age, always inhaling his meals, always racing to the next thing. It happened when Micah reached into his jacket pocket for a napkin. Something fell out and clattered onto the table, spinning once before settling between the salt and pepper shakers. A brass compass, tarnished but unmistakable. Arthur stared at it. The world around him went very quiet. "That's mine," Micah said quickly, reaching for it. "I didn't steal it. Where did you get this?" Arthur's voice came out strange, thin, and far away. Micah pulled the compass closer to his chest. "My mom gave it to me. She said it belonged to my father." "Your father? I don't know him." "Mom said he died before I was born." Arthur's hands were trembling. He could see the engraving from where he sat, B.A.K. Benjamin Arthur Kinsley. And beneath the initials, the words he knew by heart. By true north, find your way home. Micah, Arthur said, and he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. Can I look at that compass? Just for a moment, I'll give it right back. The boy studied him for a long time with those watchful eyes. Then, slowly, he held it out. Arthur took it with both hands, turned it over, and felt something crack open inside his ribs. It was real. It was Benjamin's. He would have known the weight of it blindfolded, the slight dent on the left side, where Ben had dropped it on the dock the summer he turned 19. Your mother, Arthur said, fighting to keep his voice level. What's her name? Andy. Well, Andrea. But everybody calls her Andy. Arthur didn't recognize the name. Benjamin had dated a girl named Beth in college, and before that a few others Arthur had met briefly at holidays. No Andrea. No Andy. And she said your father died? Micah nodded. In a car crash, before I was born. She doesn't talk about it much. It makes her sad. A car crash. Benjamin had died in a car crash 14 years ago. Micah looked about 10. That would mean Benjamin had fathered this child without knowing it, or perhaps knowing and never telling Arthur. Either possibility was staggering. Where do you live, Micah? The boy's expression tightened. Around where? I'm not telling you that. Fair enough, Arthur thought. The boy had survival instincts. You didn't last long on the streets without them. Can I ask you something else then? How did you get to Boston? You don't sound like you're from here. Bus, Micah said. From Brockton. It's not that far. Brockton, a working-class city 20 miles south. Arthur knew it from the shipping yard they'd once considered building there. Does your mother know you're here? Something flickered across Micah's face. Guilt, maybe, or worry. She's at work. Double shift at the laundromat. She won't know I left. She'll worry when she gets home. I'll be back before then. Micah straightened up, suddenly defensive. Look, thanks for the food. I should go. Wait. Arthur reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. If you or your mother ever need anything at all, please call this number. Micah looked at the card, then at Arthur. Why would you do that? You don't know us. Call it instinct, Arthur said. And Micah, take care of that compass. It's more valuable than you know. After the boy left, Arthur sat in the booth for another 40 minutes, unable to move. His mind was doing calculations, timelines, possibilities. Benjamin had died in November 14 years ago. If Micah was 10, he would have been born roughly 4 years after Benjamin's death. The math didn't work. Unless Benjamin hadn't died when Arthur thought he had. The idea was insane. Arthur had identified Benjamin's personal effects. He'd stood at the crash site. He'd seen the police report, the coroner's findings. His son was gone, but the compass had been in the casket. Arthur had placed it there himself, had watched them lower the lid. He called his attorney, Philip Hartwell, from the car. I need you to find someone, Arthur said, his voice rough. A woman named Andrea Reeves, goes by Andy, living somewhere in or around Brockton. She has a son, about 10 years old, named Micah Arthur. It's 9:30 at night. I know what time it is, Philip. I need this by morning. Philip, who had worked with Arthur for over 2 decades, knew better than to argue when that tone came through. I'll make some calls. By 9 the next morning, Philip was sitting in Arthur's home office in Beacon Hill with a thin folder. Andrea Reeves, age 37, works 2 jobs, one at a coin laundromat, one doing overnight stocking at a grocery warehouse. She and her son live in a basement apartment in Brockton, 14B Prospect Street, no arrest record, no outstanding debts beyond the usual medical bills. The boy attends Brockton Elementary, but has missed a significant number of school days this year. And the father? Philip hesitated. The birth certificate lists the father as Benjamin Kinsley. No middle name, no further identification. It was filed in Worcester County, which is why it never came across your radar. Arthur closed his eyes. Benjamin Kinsley. Not a common name, but not so unusual that it would trigger any flags. Without the middle name, without the connection to Kinsley Maritime, it was just a name on a form in a county office. There's more, Philip said carefully. I had my investigator pull some threads. This Andrea Reeves attended UMass Amherst, same years as Benjamin. They overlapped for at least 2 semesters. Arthur's mind went to the autumn of Benjamin's junior year, the semester he'd been distant and evasive, the semester he'd stopped coming home on weekends. Arthur had attributed it to the usual growing pains of a 20-year-old, pulling away from his father's shadow. Is there any chance? Arthur said slowly. That Benjamin knew about this child. Based on the timeline, the boy would have been conceived roughly 2 months before the accident. Whether Benjamin knew about the pregnancy, Philip spread his hands. That's a question only Andrea Reeves can answer. Arthur drove to Brockton that afternoon. He could have sent someone, but this wasn't something you delegated. The GPS led him through increasingly worn neighborhoods until he reached Prospect Street, a block of triple-deckers with sagging porches and cars that had seen better decades. Number 14 was a faded yellow house with a chain-link fence and a yard that was mostly dirt. The basement apartment had its own entrance around the side, down a set of cracked concrete steps. Arthur stood at the bottom of those steps for a full minute, his heart hammering. Then he knocked. The woman who opened the door was younger than he expected, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and tired eyes that sharpened immediately when she saw the well-dressed stranger on her doorstep. "Whatever you're selling, we don't want it." Andrea Reeves. She stiffened. "Who's asking?" "My name is Arthur Kinsley." The color drained from her face. She gripped the doorframe as though the ground had shifted beneath her. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then, very quietly, "He has your eyes. I always thought he had your eyes. You know who I am. Of course I know who you are. I've known who you are since the first time Ben showed me a picture of his family." She glanced past him, checking the street. "You'd better come inside." The apartment was small but scrupulously clean. A fold-out couch, a kitchen table that doubled as a desk, and on every available surface, books. Stacks and stacks of them. Paperbacks with creased spines, library books with due dates stamped inside. Micah's world was small, but it was littered with stories. "He's at school," Andy said, reading Arthur's glance toward the boy's corner. A sleeping bag on an air mattress, a plastic crate of folded clothes, and a flashlight for reading at night. "He should be, anyway. He's been skipping lately. I can't seem to get him to stop." "I know," Arthur said. "I met him last night." Andy's expression shifted from surprise to fear. "What do you mean you met him?" Arthur told her about the restaurant, about the compass. As he spoke, Andy sank into a kitchen chair, her hands pressed flat on the table. "I gave him that compass when he turned 10 last March," she said quietly. "Ben gave it to me the week before he died. He said if anything ever happened to him, he wanted his child to have it." "Ben knew about the pregnancy?" Andy nodded, tears forming. "I told him 3 weeks before the accident." "He was over the moon, Arthur. He wanted to tell you right away, but we agreed to wait until after midterms. He wanted to do it properly. He had this whole plan to bring me home for Thanksgiving, to introduce me to you and Miriam." Arthur felt the room tilt. All these years he'd grieved a son he thought had left nothing behind. And all along there had been a grandchild growing up 20 miles away. "Why didn't you come to me?" he asked, and his voice broke on the last word. "After Ben died, why didn't you reach out?" Andy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I tried. I called your office 3 times in the months after the funeral. The first time I was put on hold and disconnected. The second time someone took a message that I'm sure you never received. The third time, a woman, some assistant, told me that Mr. Kinsley was not accepting personal calls and suggested I contact the company's legal department if I had a claim to make." Andy's jaw tightened. A claim, as if my baby was a lawsuit. Arthur felt sick. He thought of his staff in those early months after Benjamin's death, the well-meaning gatekeepers who had shielded him from the hundreds of calls and letters that poured in. Condolences, business proposals, and apparently a young pregnant woman trying to tell him about his grandchild. "I was 23 years old, pregnant, heartbroken, and completely alone," Andy continued. "My parents had cut me off when I dropped out of school. I had no money for a lawyer. I saw the news coverage of Ben's funeral. The governor was there, senators, business leaders, and I thought, how could someone like me even get through the door? So you raised him alone." "I raised him the best I could, worked every job I could find. Waitressing, cleaning houses, stocking shelves. I had him in a hospital in Worcester, because that's where the free clinic sent me. I put Benjamin Kinsley on the birth certificate because it was the truth, and because I wanted Micah to know where he came from, even if he never met that side of his family." Arthur looked around the basement apartment with new eyes. The books, the neatly folded clothes, the school projects taped to the wall. This woman had given his grandson everything she had, which was almost nothing, and had done it with a dignity that humbled him. "I want to help," Arthur said. "Both of you. I want to know my grandson. Andy studied him for a long time. Micah doesn't know anything about you. He doesn't know his father's family has money. He just knows his dad died and left him a compass. Then we'll go slowly. Whatever pace you're comfortable with. I'm not comfortable with any of this, Andy said honestly. But Micah deserves to know his grandfather. He asks about Ben all the time. I've run out of stories to tell him. When Micah came home that afternoon, he froze in the doorway, recognizing Arthur instantly. He looked at his mother, then back at Arthur, then at his mother again. Mom? That's the man from the restaurant. I know, baby. Come sit down. We need to talk. What followed was the most delicate conversation of Arthur's life. Andy did most of the talking, with a gentleness and honesty that Arthur admired. She told Micah that the man who'd bought him dinner was his grandfather, that his father, Benjamin, had been Arthur's son, that the compass connected them all, a thread stretching across years and loss and silence. Micah listened without interrupting. When Andy finished, he looked at Arthur with an expression far too old for a 10-year-old boy. Is that why you wanted to see my compass? Because it was your son's. I gave it to him on his 18th birthday, Arthur said, his throat tight. I never thought I'd see it again, and you're really my grandpa. I am, if you'll have me. Micah considered this with the same careful watchfulness Arthur had seen at the restaurant. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the compass, and set it on the table between them. Mom says a compass always points home, Micah said. I guess it finally did. Arthur couldn't speak. He pressed his hand over his eyes and let the tears come, the first he'd cried since Benjamin's funeral. The weeks that followed moved faster than any of them expected. Arthur's first instinct was to sweep in and fix everything immediately. New apartment, new school, new clothes, new everything. Andy pushed back hard. He's not a project, she told Arthur during one of their increasingly frequent conversations. You can't just throw money at 10 years of absence. She was right, and Arthur knew it. So they compromised. He helped them move out of the basement and into a clean 2-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood, close enough to Micah's school that the boy wouldn't have to switch mid-year. He set up an education fund but let Andy manage the household finances on her own terms. She kept a job at the laundromat, not because she had to anymore, but because she wasn't ready to be dependent on anyone. I've taken care of us for a decade, she told Arthur. I don't know how to stop. You don't have to stop, Arthur replied. Just let someone help carry the weight. Micah, for his part, adapted with the resilience that only children possess. He was cautious at first, treating Arthur's Beacon Hill townhouse like a museum, afraid to touch anything. But Arthur, who had spent years in the company of boardrooms and balance sheets, discovered something remarkable. He liked being a grandfather. He liked helping Micah with homework at the kitchen table. He liked teaching him to tie sailing knots and telling him stories about Benjamin at that age. He liked the way Micah's face lit up at small things, a slice of pizza eaten on the harbor steps, a ride on the T, a trip to the New England Aquarium. Dad would have liked this, Micah said one Saturday afternoon as they stood watching the penguins waddle across their enclosure. He said it casually, the way children say enormous things without knowing their weight. He would have loved it, Arthur agreed. He would have loved you. By spring, the transformation was visible to everyone in Arthur's orbit. His executive team at Kinsley Maritime noticed it first, the way he smiled more easily, the way he left the office at a reasonable hour, the way he'd pull out his phone during meetings to check a photo Micah had texted him. His assistant, who had been with him for 15 years, remarked that she hadn't seen him this engaged with life since before Benjamin's accident. I found my grandson, Arthur told her simply, or rather, he found me. In April, Andy agreed to let Arthur take Micah on a sailing trip in Boston Harbor. It was a perfect New England spring day, the kind where the light on the water looks like scattered coins. Arthur taught Micah to read the compass, the real one, Benjamin's compass, showing him how to find true north and adjust for deviation. Your father and I used to sail every summer, Arthur said, easing the tiller as a gust caught the mainsail. From the time he was your age until he went to college. These were the best days of my life. Until now, Micah said, with a grin that was so purely Benjamin's that Arthur had to look away for a moment. Until now, he agreed. That evening, Arthur made a decision he'd been turning over for weeks. He sat down with Andy after Micah had gone to bed and placed a small velvet box on the table. What is this? Andy asked, wary. Arthur opened it. Inside was a compass smaller than the others, newer but engraved with the same geometric pattern, the same family motto. On the back, MBR, Micah Benjamin Reeves. There have always been 3 Kinsley compasses, Arthur said. My father's, mine, and Benjamin's. I had a 4th one made. For Micah, because he is a Kinsley, whether or not he ever takes the name. Andy touched the compass gently, then looked up at Arthur with glistening eyes. You're giving him a place in your family. He's always had a place. I just didn't know about it. They gave Micah the compass on his 11th birthday, a warm day in March, at a small party in Arthur's backyard. Andy had baked the cake herself, chocolate with vanilla frosting, Micah's favorite. A few of Micah's school friends came, along with Philip Hartwell and his wife, who had become something like extended family. When Micah opened the velvet box, he went very still. He turned the compass over, read his initials, read the motto. Then he looked at Arthur. Does this mean I'm really part of your family? Like officially? You've always been part of my family, Arthur said, kneeling to meet his grandson's eyes. This just makes it so you'll never forget it. Micah threw his arms around Arthur's neck. Thank you, Grandpa, he whispered. It was the first time he'd used the word. Arthur held him tight, and over the boy's shoulder, he saw Andy crying quietly, her hand pressed to her mouth. As summer settled over Boston, Arthur began talking to Andy about something he'd been considering for months. He wanted to establish a foundation in Benjamin's name, focused on connecting children with family members they'd been separated from, whether by death, incarceration, addiction, or the simple cruelty of circumstance. There are thousands of kids like Micah out there, Arthur said one evening on the porch, watching Micah chase fireflies in the yard. Children who have family they don't know about, grandparents, aunts, uncles who would give anything to find them, all because someone couldn't get through a phone line, or didn't have the money for a lawyer, or was too proud or too scared to ask. Andy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'll run it. What? The foundation, I'll run it. I know what those mothers are going through. I lived it. I know the system, the barriers, the shame. You can fund it, and I'll build it. Arthur looked at her, this woman who had raised his grandson in a basement on courage and minimum wage, and he saw something he'd been missing in his boardroom for years. Purpose that came from lived experience, not spreadsheets. It's yours, he said, whatever you need. The Benjamin Kinsley Foundation launched quietly that fall. Andy brought to it the same fierce competence she'd applied to keeping her son alive and fed for a decade. Within 6 months, they'd reunited 14 families. Within a year, the number was 47. Andy hired a small team, brought on pro bono lawyers, partnered with hospitals and county offices across Massachusetts. Arthur watched her work with a pride he hadn't felt since Benjamin's college graduation. And he watched Micah grow, watched him catch up in school, make the honor roll, join the junior sailing club at the yacht club Arthur had quietly sponsored him into, not with a fanfare of money, but with a word to the right people about a promising young sailor who needed a chance. On a crisp evening in late October, almost exactly 1 year after Micah had wandered into the Capitol Grill, with holes in his sneakers and a compass in his pocket, the 3 of them sat together at Arthur's kitchen table. Andy had cooked a simple pasta with tomato sauce and garlic bread, the kind of meal that costs almost nothing but fills a home with warmth. Micah was doing his homework between bites, asking Arthur for help with a history essay about immigration at Ellis Island. Andy was reviewing foundation grant proposals on her laptop. Arthur was ostensibly reading the paper, but mostly he was just looking at them, this family he hadn't known he had, this second chance he'd done nothing to deserve. Grandpa, Micah said, not looking up from his essay, did you know that 12 million people came through Ellis Island? I did know that. They all left their homes to find something better. That's kind of what Mom did, right? Except she wasn't looking for something better. She was just trying to survive. Andy looked up from her laptop. Arthur set down his paper. That's exactly right, Arthur said softly. Micah chewed his pencil thoughtfully. And then I walked into a restaurant and you were there, and now we're here. He paused. It's kind of like the compass, right? You don't always know where you're going. You just follow the needle and hope it takes you somewhere good. Arthur reached across the table and rested his hand on the old brass compass that Micah still carried everywhere, the one that had traveled from Arthur's hands to Benjamin's casket, from a dead man's possessions to a young woman's desperate keeping, from a boy's torn pocket to a white tablecloth in a steakhouse, and finally back to a kitchen table where 3 people were eating pasta together on a Tuesday night. "It takes you home," Arthur said. "It always takes you home." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall over Boston, soft and unhurried, covering the old city in white. And inside that warm kitchen, a compass rested between a grandfather's weathered hands, pointing true north, pointing exactly where it had always been meant to go.